Well, that's my favorite question, the cosmic question, why are we here?
I love it.
Yeah. Well, you've been writing this great stuff about why we've been exhibiting bad behavior and how we can perhaps curtail that a bit. Um, and that has been the main subject of the human race for at least a year now. Uh, so uh, then I wrote something and I sent it to you pre-publication, and you liked it. And it was essentially a recap. It started with a recap of all of the philosophers and spiritual leaders, um, or 90% of them, and what each one of them said about why we should be virtuous and kind and do good, and which, if you cluster them in a modern statistical way, they fall into a couple of clusters. One is God wants us to be good. Uh, it's better for society for us to be good, and it's better for you, the individual, to be good, and various intercombinations of those depending on which philosopher or spiritual leader you're talking about. And you said, "Wow, I love this, but it's going to be hard to get people to be good. Maybe it would be easier to get them to stop being bad."
Yeah. I think, it sort of depends on the lens you want to look at this from. Are you trying to inspire institutions, nations, and education system and things like that about how they should be teaching people to be good? And in that regard, I'm all for it, right? I love scaled opportunities and impacts. I am an aspiring Stoic. I think I have some natural Stoic tendencies I was born with and sort of developed over the years with my experiences in life and perspective that I gained. And I do try to talk to friends and family. I recommend the books that I'm reading and things like that. But it always feels a little bit paternalistic when I try to spread that gospel beyond, right? Oh, you should live like me, or you should live like Marcus Aurelius. And it's good. I like to inspire, and I think that can be very useful, but only up until a point. Most of the work for inspiring people to be good has to come from nearer, right? Friends and family and people and interactions over time in the education system and the values that you grow up with in your culture and society. And so that's great. We should do that as much as possible. But in the meantime, we've inherited a system that has a lot of people that have learned those values and some people that maybe don't have them, or they have stronger incentives to work outside of the be good. And I can't change their incentives so much. Those sort of exist. There's an incentive to be lazy or selfish or quiet. Staying silent at times when you see things like don't ruffle feathers or whatever that is. There's lots of incentives for that, especially today. And so I don't expect to change those. I'd love to inspire people. Hey, speak up when you see something. It's a little hard to do on the positive lens. I think what I'm trying to do, and I think there's value in there, is just telling everyone, hey, there's just a line on the negative, on the really bad stuff that we as a society can't accept. And I talk about that as a taboo, and that is taboos are as old as time, really. As soon as we were these social nomadic tribal creatures of sorts, and we determined that there's some things that if people do that are socially destructive for the group, we will shun them out by force, by legal means, and by just via social consequences. And that has to be in place. I don't think we can live in a world without society saying some things are outside of the bounds of what our culture allows, our society allows, our nation allows, whatever that is. And it could be a family, right? These goes into all different unit sizes. So that has been my passion. As much as I want to inspire the good, I want to inspire everyone to say there's a line of bad that we must not tolerate.
Yeah, I totally support that. Um, it's not an either or situation. It's a both, and carrot and stick, so to speak. But
Hmm.
I think that there's another argument for your side of the approach, and that is social media punishes idealism um, and interprets it as holier than thou attitude. Like there's the assumption of hypocrisy,
Hmm.
which statistically is not a bad assumption since there's so much hypocrisy.
Yeah, I wrote about that recently about hypocrisy. Yeah, social media has been an accelerant, I think, on things that have been out there, and it brings out the worst in us in a lot of ways. And we have to live with it. And so, as much as I would love people to be kind to each other and to act on social media the same way that they would treat somebody in a face-to-face interaction, I don't think that's possible. We should encourage people to, right? And I love all the various calls for, hey, for children, especially as they're developing, and that's even a little bit different, to sort of think twice before they say and do things online that they probably wouldn't do in person, for a variety of reasons. But that's unlikely to change that dynamic, that we have. But again, it's drawing that line. So yeah, you can be kind of a jerk to somebody online the way that you wouldn't be to them in person, but you can't cross the line into this really vile, abhorrent, really taboo behavior that, whether you would say it online or offline, like there's still a line. The line doesn't change because you're online or offline.
What happens when role models or people who are role models for some people um, relish and wallow in crossing the line, and they make crossing the line masculinity and manhood and toughness and attractive, um, and so they're actually those role models are encouraging people to emulate them and strive for ever more taboo behavior and more physical violence even.
Yeah, I struggle with this one a lot, because it goes back to this. And whatever, I don't want to get too political, but you can think about political leaders that are norm breakers. They don't have the decorum that we are used to, that we like, and it does normalize these things. It does encourage others to sort of follow along, and it is dangerous. It absolutely is a slippery slope. It is not good, for a number of reasons. With that said, there is still a line that is just uncrossable. It's not nice when somebody isn't nice. It's not nice when somebody is a jerk or rude or crass or says things that are really, like, everyone would agree is wrong and bad. And then there's a separate line where it is just, absolutely unacceptable for us to allow in polite society. And so, a person making fun of a woman's weight, it's terrible, it's mean, we don't want to encourage that, we should all be appalled and shocked. But it's not the same as somebody saying this entire group of people should be killed. And so what I really have tried to do is, not allow us to flatten these things into, oh, that's all bad behavior. Somebody being a jerk is the same as somebody being sort of genocidal. Um, they're different levels. We should shun both of them, but there's one that sort of needs our collective shunning. Um, One other point that I'll make on that, which is, it's unfortunate, where I think I understand some people's anger. I understand people having resentment. And so sometimes they lash out and you make fun of somebody and you say this crude and crass thing. because you think the other side has been crude and crass and your enemy. And so you're not going to sort of give up, sort of cede this ground. Okay, you can be a jerk, but I have to sort of, go high. And so there's always this like tit for tat, who was mean first and who said this other thing. And they're all hypocrites because they're judging me, but their side is this. That's okay. That, like, we can't solve for that. But then again, there's a line. There's just, you can never endorse violence. You can never be this like hateful bigot towards a group of people. When you do that, then everyone needs to be calling that out and say there's no excuse. Just because that side said, oh, we should kill all of the X, or we should persecute and do illiberal things to that group, it doesn't give an excuse to the other side to say we should do the same.
Absolutely. Are you getting comments and feedback, and what kind of comments and feedback are you getting? Do you have any sense that, are you getting some moments where you feel that you've moved somebody a bit and you're making some progress?
There was one very big success. So yes, there's lots of progress. People really like the ideas. I've had a number. There's one huge success, and then there's lots of little things that I hope that they build up, that they sort of, it's a snowball effect of sorts. But the one really big success for me that I didn't expect would happen in a way that I would understand. I wrote one article, one essay a while ago. I called it "Not in Christ's Name," and the message was to Christian faithful that they needed to be the ones to denounce the people that are expressing this overt hateful bigotry. A lot of it is anti-Semitism, but not only. A lot of it Jew hatred, but not only, and doing it in Christ's name, right? They're the ones saying, I'm Christian and this is why I oppose blank. And sometimes it's coded and sometimes it is very explicit what they're saying. And I said that the people in the church have to be the one to denounce this. This top down and bottom up, this, sort of the priests and the Pope and just people, the flock, right? It's just somebody in the community. If your kid is saying something, is flirting with these ideas of, with a Nick Fuentes or somebody else that is saying Christ is king and the Jews should all be wiped off the face of the earth, it's up to the parents to sort of say, that's not Christian. That's not sort of our values. That's not what Christ taught. So anyway, I published this piece. And a former colleague of mine from the ad industry, who I knew, not very well, she saw my post on LinkedIn. She shared it with her church, and her church then organized a rally in Chicago with multiple other churches to sort of stand up against hatred being spewed in the name of the church. And so I was very pleased that sort of this had a direct, sort of tangible impact where multiple people got together and said, hey, we are going to do something. And then it did a visible thing that a lot of other people could see that hopefully will inspire others to say, oh yeah, we're going to speak up against this. We can't stay silent anymore. And so those are the types of examples, but my goal for all of this, I don't expect to reach tens of thousands even myself. And certainly not hundreds of thousands and millions that I think are needed. I'm trying to reach other moral leaders, people that already have audiences, whether it's with podcasts or their writing or they're just their thinking, and let them take this message forward. I think the word taboo is the word. It is a free word that no one is really using in society. It's sort of not, it's just been dormant. And so it doesn't have this set definition that everyone knows what it means. We don't need to sort of like reclaim it and redefine it. We're just going to start using this word and everyone kind of knows what it means. And everyone is seeing, the piece that actually I'm going to write this week is everyone is seeing taboos being violated all the time. And they don't know how to name it. They don't know how to name it that, oh, that's a taboo. And what I am writing this week is this feeling of moral disgust. It's what people felt on October 8th when people were celebrating what happened on October 7th, when people were celebrating Luigi Mangione, when people were celebrating Charlie Kirk getting killed. Everyone felt this like knot in their stomach, not just from the atrocity, but that people were celebrating these things. And they didn't know how to name it. They didn't know, oh, that's the taboo. That's why I feel this like terrible knot that our society is allowing this thing to happen. And so I think by naming it and getting a lot more people to name these things, we can sort of like, you could all of a sudden it's a, you see something, you say something. And saying something is sometimes it's shaming somebody who does the wrong thing. And sometimes they require a much more severe social consequence, much more severe ostracism. And I always bring this back to the KKK because I think they are the perfect example of how we upheld the taboo against overt hateful bigotry. You were not allowed to be a member of the KKK and still be in sort of good public standing in your workplace, in your society, in your church. You had to wear a mask. You had to hide that hateful bigotry that you sort of believed in. And I think we basically need to do the same thing. If people hold these terrible views, they cannot be part of our polite society. They cannot be part of our mainstream politics. If they're willing to apologize, denounce that sort of hatred, as many KKK members eventually did. They took off their masks, they took off their robes, and they said, I'm moving away from that. And we welcome them back into polite society. And I think that's really important. We have this open door. It's one of my principles for restoring these taboos. It's how we prevent this from becoming cancel culture. But I do think it is necessary that we don't just allow these people to express this hateful bigotry and then still have a place in polite society where the rest of us are operating.
I think that what you just said, it contains two very strong messages that are very actionable. One is for employers and including huge corporations. They removed DEI, but maybe they could put in TABU in place of DEI. Maybe that would be more socially acceptable all around. That would be one, important message that you just laid out. The other one about reaching spiritual leaders and spiritual communities and having the spiritual communities do exactly what happened in Chicago and just Xerox that everywhere. I think that people who are truly in the church, truly spiritual, and not just gone through the motions, we'll pick that up and we'll do that. And in fact, that will be a good sign that they are truly spiritual and not just going through the motions.
Yeah, I'll actually talk about both of those. The first one with the employers in the workplace, I agree. That's kind of the place where this needs to. It probably has the most teeth, especially because social circles. There's now enough. It's become socially acceptable in certain circles to hold these views, and so I don't expect everyone to lose all of their friends if many of their friends are somewhat sympathetic to this. And so they won't necessarily face this like social consequences, or at least not fully the way that KKK members would be like almost completely ostracized. They'd be made total social pariahs. But the workplace can say, hey, you can't sort of be allowed here. This is a liability for us. What actually gave me a lot of the inspiration, because I'd been thinking about this for a long time, when Charlie Kirk was killed, it actually gave me hope that we could do this and we could actually address this, because what happened, as I sort of framed this up, the responses to his murder, there were people who were remorseful. Most normal people were sort of sad, whether they knew him or not, or liked him or not. They were very sad about what just happened to him. There were people that were remorseless. And these were people that didn't like him. They knew something about him. They thought they knew something about him. They said he was a bad person. I don't feel bad that he's dead or that he was killed. And then there were people that were rejoicers. They were really celebrating the fact that he was killed. And what happened in real time, and I spent a lot of time online, there was sort of this attempt by a lot of Charlie Kirk's followers to get these two groups fired, the remorseless and the rejoicers. And they reached out, they found out who they were and their employers, and they reached out to them. And by and large, what was really interesting and what was inspiring to me is that the taboo held. The people that were remorseless did not get fired from their jobs. The people that were rejoicing did get fired from their jobs. And that's exactly what should happen. It's not a taboo to be remorseless about somebody being killed. It's crass, it's cruel, you don't have to say it. But it's not the same degree as saying, yes, political violence against somebody for their speech, he deserves to be killed. And so that, I think the pressure is what's been missing, right? Employers, if they sort of felt the pressure of, oh my God, my employee said this awful thing, believes this awful thing, they held a chant at a rally that said, we support Hamas, and my other employees or my customers are saying, this person has to go. You can't have this person at your company. I refuse to sort of do business with you or things like that. If that pressure was there, they would say, oh, yeah, I'm getting rid of him. But if they didn't cross that line, if they just were at a Free Palestine rally and everyone said, fire them, most employers would say, no, they didn't do anything wrong. Like this is so that gives me a little bit of hope. And I agree, a lot of the pressure needs to eventually sort of be economic in order for people to sort of feel that those consequences. Um, on your other point about the sort of activating the spiritual leaders, absolutely. Actually, somebody recommended a book to me on how to, it was a marketing book, but it's the idea of sort of building these ambassadors. And so yeah, I'm trying to both do the big inspiration, and I haven't yet gotten into the like reach out to people to try to activate them. What I'm hopeful about, though, is these things are already happening. Maybe they're not as organized, they're not as widespread, but we have seen recently there's been a couple of sort of bishops and really prominent leaders that have now spoken up, and they said there's no place for anti-Semitism in the church. And so you see that pushback. I think you do see these spiritual leaders that really, they obviously really believe in this, but they also now see that staying silent, it's not that they didn't believe in it, but they realize that staying silent is just seeding that, sort of creating that vacuum for people to come in and say, no, this is what the church believes.
I think that the most subtle and interesting and valuable part of what you're doing is defining where the dotted line is in the gray area. So you know, you're not saying that we all have to be candy-ass goody-goodies. You're giving room for people to be whatever they want to be up to a point, and you're defining the point as a bright line. It isn't, I said dotted line, but that's not the point. You've turned the dotted line into a bright line.
It's actually, so this is one of the challenges. And so you asked the feedback I'm getting, and there's a lot of thoughtful pushback. And the way that I frame it, there's speech that is absolutely fine, right? Like, no, not thinking about it. There's speech that is just beyond the pale. Like anyone looking at it would say this is totally wrong. And then there's a big gray area. The gray area and defining that line and what falls right outside, it is difficult. I've tried to do it. I've tried to be really principled and thoughtful. And I think I've done a good job with frameworks. It's not like I can universally say, because maybe somebody was joking or not. And so you have to sort of consider all of these things. And I have separate frameworks to like, how do you evaluate not just the thing the person said, but what's the other context? Who do they hang out with? Did they apologize when they were questioned about this? Did they clarify that they meant this thing that they said in a really hateful, bigoted way, or they were just joking? Because I do think there's a lot of leniency we have to give to people in general, but especially people are joking. So there's the gray area. And my view is, even if we don't solve for all of the gray area, let's at least solve for the thing that almost anyone looking at it would say that is beyond line. Saying I support a terrorist organization, that should just be clearly wrong, no matter what. Somebody can then come and just want to, oh, but what if they were joking? No, that's not okay. Fine. There's always going to be this like, you could, what if? But there's a lot of cases here where it's like pretty clear they're not joking. Now, were they silly and just chanting things at a rally because it sounded good? Yes, that's fine. And I'm okay. The one example of this, like from the river to the sea, or that example. I don't remember the poll that was like 80%, 70% of people who chant that don't know which river and don't know which sea. And so are they saying it? Are they chanting it in a genocidal way? No, I think the vast majority are not. But if you were to then go and inform one of them, actually, what the implications are of this statement is that there is no more Israel, that these people need to sort of be uprooted, genocided, whatever that is, like that's what would happen. And they say, oh, now I understand what that means. If they then continue to chant it, that's the taboo, right? Then they are crossing the line. And so I have grace for people that are ignorant, but back to the point on the hypocrisy, if I were to go and, chant the South shall rise again, a lot of people would say, what are you doing? That's super offensive. Would it be okay if I said, no, 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 I don't mean it that way? No, there's a meaning, right? A lot of people are interpreting it, whether I mean it as a dog whistle or not. There's people that will interpret it in this hateful, taboo, sort of desiring of harm way. And that makes it a taboo. And the person has a chance to clarify, to distance themselves, to say, no, I don't want to cause harm. And so, because I don't want to cause harm, I'm not going to say a thing that can be used in this harmful way. And so, yeah, if we can just eliminate the stuff that is clearly beyond the line, that 90% of people would look at that case and say, no, you shouldn't be able to say you support Hamas, then we're going to be in a much better place. We don't have to solve all of the gray area to sort of improve the general vibe of the country.
Great work.
Thanks.
Glad you're doing it.
Thanks. It's I have a piece that I'm going to write, but imagine a world where these things aren't taboo. It's hard to really picture, where imagine in a regular workplace, somebody could say just what you would consider now this like abhorrent, awful thing. And I don't mean just a DEI, a microaggression kind of thing. Imagine saying like, oh, I hate all of the Jews. I hate all of the blacks. Like, imagine somebody saying this awful thing in I wish they were all locked up. I wish we deported them all. I wish they were enslaved again. And they didn't face massive social consequences. Imagine it was just normalized. Oh, that Bill, yeah, he just hates the Jews. It's okay. That's insane, right? Like, to me, that's like the difference between what we had with the KKK, where those views were taboo, and Nazi Germany, where it just became socially acceptable to hold these really hateful views. And so the only way we prevent getting to something closer to that is by holding this line.
I believe that between the two of us taking very different approaches, we're both trying to bring the world back from the place that you just described as Nazi Germany, which has now become something like normal and acceptable to apparently about 30 million Americans. I first saw a piece of evidence predictive of today's state in 2017. I was working with Simmons, and Stephen Millman was there, and we did a survey question, or a series of survey questions, and analyzed them. And at that point in time, about 10% of respondents believed in QAnon. 10%, which is 30 million, is about 10% of the US. So there's been, ever since, at least going back as far as 2017 and probably much earlier, about 10% of Americans have been KKK leaners and haven't given up that tendency. Nothing else has made them do it. Your approach in its current form is a unique approach that I haven't seen taken before. And let's hope it works. The other thing we found from that survey, and other surveys have shown, is that 2 to 3% of the population is quite willing to do violence at the drop of a hat for almost any reason.
You know what? So this is a really good framing, because this comes back to also the survey that came out recently about Americans. Most Americans think that, most Americans are bad, morally bad, or whatever that is. So I disagree. I don't think there's enough nuance there. And so 10% being QAnon doesn't mean 10% are KKK. KKK was like, that's the 2 to 3% that really wants to commit violence against groups of people just for the color of their skin or whatever that is. I think we have a very, very small percentage of people that actually fall, and that's a far left and a far right, the furthest left and right, that would actually say, I want to see that happen. I'm happy when that happens. They are a very vocal minority, but they are the minority. And even if they have an extra 10% that are sympathetic to them, they're not a bloodthirsty extra sort of 10% on each side. And so if we make these views taboo and sort of shameful, socially shameful. I really do think, I don't expect that the 2 to 3%, they will continue to hold those views. Like that might be in their nature. I don't know what that is. It's not really their nature, but it's something that will be very hard to talk them out of, which is possible. Some of them will be talked out of it, but probably not all of them. But if all of the rest know these views are shameful and they won't say them out loud, some of them might talk themselves out of those ideas, right? They might say, oh, like, why can't I say these things? And they're not blaming society. Like, you realize you're in the minority. And so I'm all for, I don't care if actually people hold these views. I mean, I would like them to not hold these hateful views. What's much more important to me is that they don't feel comfortable saying them publicly. And if we can stop at least that, we can actually prevent a lot of these ideas from spreading. Sure, they'll be online. They'll sort of be in this like underground online, just like terrorists are, like that's a problem that society is always going to have. But that's a much better reality than having all of this out in the open and being socially acceptable. And so I believe in the goodness of people. Not that they're all charitable, Mother Teresa's, but most people don't want to see random innocent people being harmed. That applies to everyone. And there are exceptions. There are exceptions in a time of war, in a time of challenge. I'm from Israel. I have Israeli family on all sides of the political spectrum. None of them are cheering on for innocents to be killed in Gaza or Iran or Lebanon. But when it happens, they are sort of in this like, this stuff needs to happen, right? They don't deserve to die, but like some of this stuff has to happen in order for us to have peace, for to take out sort of the forces that are enabling this. So I have empathy for people that are angry and hurt, and want to see some sort of justice in their mind, even if it's a little distorted. But I think the vast majority of people don't take pleasure in an innocent person being hurt or persecuted in sort of an unjustified way.